All right, guys, so we just cleaned up the Bronco, and man, is it looking good. It is ready, absolutely ready for this new motor going into it. So we've been kind of cataloging a few things. We're going to start going down a wiring diagram and making sure that all the modules that we're going to need are ultimately here, or we can get ordered. In terms of mechanically fitting in the motor, for the most part, we've got what we thought we'd see when we did this. You know, we had the other Bronco for a little while, so we kind of understood what the V6 version was like. But certainly, you know, kind of fully taking the motor out and having this space to play with, you kind of see and you're able to take measurements that you weren't originally able to. And so we were playing around last night with trying to figure out exactly if, you know, the powertrain should be moved front or back at all. We ideally want to keep the mounts for the transfer case and the transmission in the same spot because they're identical in between the two vehicles, the F-150 and the Bronco. But in order to do that, we may have to end up trying to get rid of or modify this front brace here. And so we're going to get into that, so don't worry about it right now. But otherwise, everything is looking good. We are on a solid track to get this motor in here in no time at all. Make some final checks in terms of other peripherals. We need to make sure the oil pan fits, so we're going to be going in and taking off the plastic oil pan from the Gen 3 Coyote and putting on a Gen 1-2 steel oil pan. But probably before that, we'll end up just test fitting the motor and seeing what's going to end up impacting with this front drivetrain with regards to the differential and with the power steering rack. Once those are cleared, we've got some custom mounts that we're going to be fabricating up. Might be able to use the same mount points that's here on the Bronco. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and make some new ones and figure it out. But otherwise, yeah, really the main thing's electrical here. So we're going to be tearing into Coyote, getting it in here, getting everything measured out, hopefully some mechanical work done. So we just measured the dimensions finally properly with the cross member in and its mount in relation to this front bar, which we think is in the way, and it definitely is in the way. It doesn't help that this bar is curved in. What we're going to go ahead and do now is reassemble. So what we're thinking here is it looks like it is exactly within this context of this bar. Likely if it was flipped the other way,
it probably would avoid it, but we want to make sure that that's the case. But one way or another, it looks like we're going to have to modify this bar in some manner so that the Coyote will fit. The nice part is the mount's the same, and obviously it fits in here space-wise, but this crank is just going to either end up kissing or just be inside of this this bar. So let's go ahead and reassemble the entire front facade, double check that nothing is going to interfere with the front of the Coyote, and if it's accessories or drives, etc. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. All right, guys, so we got the rad support and the radiator assembly. We didn't unassemble the radiator assemblies. This is exactly how it would be in the typical Bronco. At least this is how the inline 4 version is. The V6 turbo might be a little bit bigger. This isn't a terribly small radiator, but certainly something that could be upgraded. Regardless, if we do want to upgrade, it looks like we do have the space. So it looks like they definitely decided to clear the bracket here, probably to be able to clearance. Looks like they did clearance the fin support a little bit right there, but otherwise that's the only thing that gets close. And so otherwise there's still plenty of space in between this bracket and the assembly. And the nice part is there's no space, there's no features right here coming off the radiator assembly. And so definitely with the crank obviously in the center, it's not going to be close to anything. And it looks like there's plenty of space. The only other thing that we need to look at is the clearance on the driver's side here with the ABS control module and some of the lines and the oil filter, and cooler. Specifically, the cooler is what might impact something on this side. The frame likely is going to be out of the way depending on how it sits, but it's kind of close. Regardless, we'll probably have to get rid of this. But what I'm concerned about is that water cooler being too close to this ABS module. So that's definitely a point that we need to be concerned at when we lift it in here. And the last one here is this wire loom. Obviously, we're going to be redoing a lot of the wiring, so that's not really a super big issue. This was previously attached with some plastic ties with these two bolts right here. So likely we can either run that, if we need some of the same support, we can run that either higher or lower and closer on the rad itself. So that's not really a big deal. Otherwise, what we're dealing with now is trying to see if we can get it in here. I think that's pretty much the next step. We're gonna think about how we cut this bar, and that'll probably be the first thing we think about. And then, yeah, once we do that, we are probably gonna try and get the motor in here. So let's go ahead and move on over to the motor. Okay, another thing to note between the differences. Again, we've got 10R80 from a F-150 Mustang, pretty much the same castings between those two, I believe. And then we have the 10R60. So you can see the outside ribbing support on the casing is a little bit different. The actual sizes are the same, with the exception of the integrated bell housing. And so that's obviously, it sounds like why they changed the external style, because the bell housing is obviously much smaller for an inline 4 versus a V8. And I'm assuming then that it's also, it might be different for the V6, but that might be something they wanted to standardize. So regardless, the big key that I wanted to show you here is the transfer cases. So it looks like the transfer cases are basically the same, but in different configurations. There's probably, if you search the number here, and we probably will, a discrepancy somewhere in these two designs, certainly between the yoke and the flange here. But beyond that, the only real difference is two things, one that's important and one that's not. We've got the motor for the actual four-wheel drive control on the back here, and then on this one we actually have it in the front. So either one of those doesn't really matter. But the key for us is the angle of the drive shaft, the angle of the transfer case. And so this is the angle of the F-150 transfer case in terms of the drop angle. And this is the angle of the Bronco transfer case. So this angle here off horizontal. The Broncos is more than the F-150s, probably by at least a couple of degrees. So we can probably try and figure out just how close. This is something that we knew when we got the cars and looked underneath, and we had the COYOTE transfer case with us. This is like, wow, yeah, that transfer case is definitely a little bit further down on the Bronco's original powertrains. Still not the end of the world. You can obviously clearance. There's been a few people that are obviously doing conversions. Clearance the shell of the vehicle. There's luckily plenty. There's padding, and then there's carpet underneath. So if we end up needing to do some metal work, that's really not too big of an issue to clearance the transfer case angle between the two. So that's really the only big difference here on the back. The other cool part is the mounts between the F-150. You can see those two holes there and those two holes there. Use the same angle, same mount bracket. So again, these were clearly thought of in the same degree by the engineers at Ford, but definitely they decided to change the angle on these transfer cases and ultimately use a slightly different transfer case. Interesting, but not the end of the world. Still got to get this one cleaned up. Anyway, so other than that, the differences on the back, you know, we've got the trans cooler. I think on this one's obviously mounted over here. This one is mounted over here as well, but it's a little bit different positioned. So again, that doesn't really matter other than for like protection from ground when you're going over stuff, so we can, you know, make a bottom guard. That's not a big deal. And then the other thing I wanted to point out was the oil cooler here. So you can see how much this protrudes on the F-150. Oil cooler, obviously a very nice upgrade to have. But in this configuration, not so great because of how it sticks out here. And so we may have to end up taking this guy off and either direct going to the filter housing with just the filter right now. I doubt we need to run a shorter filter, or the option is to do a relocation kit. So that's probably something we're going to look at here pretty quick if we need to do that, just because of this line. It doesn't look, you know, obviously you can't rotate this anywhere because it interfere with the belt assembly. Still got to fix that connector. But the nice part is we've got our new alternator here, since the back of this one ended up being broken. So we're going to pop that in. Yeah, once this stuff's figured out, we're going to go ahead and get in the motor and see how it looks inside. All right, so we just measured the COYOTE from tip to tail, not actually tail, from where the mounts are that I showed you guys. From an equivalent position on the Bronco, the length is 52 inches to the very front of this crank. And again, measuring from an equivalent point on that mount, it's a little hard to see because it's dark, to the face of this bar is just over 50 inches. This bar is 2 inches. So again, if it was angled a different way, we might be able to have used it and not modify it, but with this bar here, I think we're definitely going to impact the front of the crank somehow. We still haven't seen if it'll impact the oil filter location with the cooler on it, but that one isn't really a big deal. Obviously the crank and the entire assembly there has to fit. But anyway, not too far off, but this is the only thing that looks like interferes in the stock chassis of the Gen 6 Bronco. So we're gonna go ahead and figure out the best way to get rid of this support. The nice part is this really isn't a frame segment. The black stuff over here that you can see, that is actually the frame. This is really more of just a body support for the top section here. And so we're going to try and see how to keep that structural integrity. I know on like the Bronco DR, it looks like they actually end up putting the motor further back in the entire bay, and likely they cut the firewall to do that. Obviously that's not what we're interested in doing. We're trying to keep everything as kind of factory how they would have actually done it if they could have and would have. Anyway, so the Bronco DR, which maybe will come out, will have a strut bar, at least in the pictures that I saw, that goes right over the top of the motor, and that definitely adds some rigidity for the front with the frame itself. But like I said, this one really is just making sure that the front fender area here, you know, this top radiator bracket gives some rigidity, but it's really just like aluminum composite. And so it'd be nice to have a kind of replacement for this. We might be able to get away with just chopping and boxing, but I don't think that's going to work on this one. If we just cut out a slot while we retain some, it's not going to be super strong here on the back, depending on how much material is left, because that moment has changed. But regardless, something in here can definitely be put in. The only crappy part is you would think that this would have been a removable section, and they even made a pocket clearly to put the machine in there. It's kind of hard to see, but in that pocket you find out that it is spot welded, not bolted like a lot of other car and truck front member support stuff. So not ideal. We're gonna see if we want to take off the spot welds or just cut the box and make something else, but that is the key that we're going to move on to next.
So remember to like, comment, subscribe. We've got a lot of work to do, but definitely stay with us. And I think we're really gonna blow this one out of the water when it's all done.